Hello, friends and fellow lovers of all things beachy. Welcome to The Beach Speaks, the podcast that shares stories about the beach and our connection to it. I'm your host and beach lover, Paige Rynne, helping you reconnect with the beach, return to your soul, and reimagine your life. So grab a cool drink, relax in your beach chair, stick your toes in the sand, and enjoy this episode of The Beach Speaks. Hey, beach lover. My guest today is Patrick Rynne, the CEO and founder of Waterlust. He is a PhD in marine physics and a master's in ocean engineering and describes himself as an avid kiter, sailor, surfer, and teller of stories, and a frequent wearer of flip-flops in socially inappropriate settings. Which, in my opinion, if you live at the beach, flip-flops are pretty much the standard for any occasion. I believe that what you wear can say a lot about you. It's an expression of who you are, your lifestyle, and what you value. For me, when I moved to the beach, it was pretty clear that I didn't need most of what was in my closet anymore. So I donated my collection of skirts and blouses and jackets and jeans and began collecting shorts, t-shirts, tank tops, and various other beach attire with sustainability in mind. So when I first heard about Waterlust, I thought it was just a cool, sustainable clothing brand, selling everything from colorful swimsuits and surf gear to t-shirts, tanks, and leggings with bright, colorful patterns that look like coral or the sun-kissed sea. And so when I went to their website and clicked on the image of their bright pink, blue, and aqua parrotfish leggings, I learned a lot more than what they were made of. I got a little science lesson, too. I subscribed to their newsletter, and after reading just a few of the articles, they're more stories than articles, I knew that Patrick would be a wonderful guest for the podcast. But in my mind, Waterlust was a big deal, and so I told myself that when I got to 100 episodes, I would then send an email to someone on their contact page with an invitation to be on the show. And I wasn't really sure who would respond, because with an email address, hello@Waterlust, it could be a chatbot for all I knew. So imagine my surprise that it was Patrick that responded the next day saying, "I'd love to share our story." And share he did. You'll learn about how Waterlust started, why his newsletters are so entertaining, and what is the one defining issue in his life, and possibly ours. And listen through to the end where Patrick talks about rip currents, I call them riptides, and what to do if you get caught in one. His answer might surprise you. It wasn't exactly what I was taught. Hey, Patrick. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
Excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful, wonderful. I first heard about Waterlust in, I think it was 2018. I went to the Miami Seafood and Wine Festival, and there was a fashion show of sorts. And I think your company had taken part in that, and I got to see some of the wonderful apparel that your company does. And it was, at the time, and I still am, very interested in conscious business and conscious consumerism and that whole mindful movement in regard to our impact in the world, and companies that are wanting to do business according to their values, and people shop according to their values, and that whole thing. So I've been following you ever since, and I started the podcast. I thought you would be a wonderful guest because I read your newsletter all the time, and I find it's very entertaining, but also very informative. I would like to ask you the question that I ask all of my
Yes, and that is, how is the beach speaking to you today?
It's a wonderful question. So I'm fortunate enough to live about a block from the beach. And so my wife and my daughter and I, we try to get there usually at least once a day. And I think the ocean and the beach in particular has always been a bit of a mental refuge for me, I think. And I think a lot of people feel that way. Maybe it's the open space or the fresh salty air or something, but I just find it incredibly relaxing and centering, and it helps me just, I don't know, get grounded, I suppose. Anytime I'm far away from the ocean, I feel uneasy. But on the flip side, one thing that's so fun about it is I could be in a foreign country far, far from home. And if I'm by the water, I feel like I sort of am home. So I was fortunate enough to grow up by the water, and I've always had the ocean really, be a very central part of my life. And so I think it's become this space that makes me feel very grounded at home, protected, safe, and happy, inspired, all of those great positive words.
Yeah. Tell me a little more about that, where you are exactly and your childhood, how you grew up with the ocean as your backyard.
Yeah, I grew up in the South Shore of Massachusetts in a town called Situate, and it's like a small fishing sailing town. And my parents were really into sailing. My dad got really into sailing and taught himself how to sail when I was about 2 years old. And having us be exposed to the ocean was a big priority for them. And so we started sailing as a family before I can remember. I think that my first time on a boat was, 2 or 3 years old. And we used to cruise up and down the coast my whole childhood. So that was really awesome to get exposed to that. And then as I grew up, I got into sailing little boats myself. Sailing was probably the biggest single impact from a sports perspective on me. It's a really interesting sport because children can get their first real exposure of independence. You can put a 7-year-old in a small sailboat and they're in charge and they can go where they want to go and do what they want to do. And I really love that. And I got to see, dolphins and play with seaweed and look at fish. And the whole ocean environment just captured me. And later in life, through high school, wasn't really until college, I got really into surfing and kite surfing and all these other water sports. But somewhere around college, I realized that it might make sense for me to try to blend my love of the ocean into what I do as a career. And I was an engineering student at the time, and I realized that there's a whole field of ocean engineering, and which was really cool. And so I got to do some work at my first sort of job was at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in Cape Cod.
Oh, wow.
And then I did a master's degree in Florida in ocean engineering, building robots and stuff. And that eventually led me to do a PhD at University of Miami in applied marine physics. And it was there while doing a PhD that I was kind of thirsty for just a little side project to keep me sane. PhDs are very on your brain, and it's nice to have a kind of like an outlet. And I felt like I had all of these friends and colleagues doing incredible work, but I was noticing that a lot of that work wasn't reaching the public in very approachable, digestible ways. And I thought it would be fun to experiment with ways to do that. And timing wise, this is sort of not earliest days, but this is around 2010, 2011. And it was when videos started to become like a thing you could put up on the internet, YouTube early days, relatively early days of Facebook, social media. So there were all of these tools emerging to experiment with science communication. And I thought I would just throw myself into that as a fun side project. And I wanted to give it a name and have its own identity, and came up with the name Waterlust as sort of a play on wanderlust, but for water. And just started experimenting with also, making videos and trying to communicate science in different ways through photography and writing. And I didn't really think much more of it, as it was just a fun project. But we found that the work we were putting out, and at the time it was myself and some other grad students, including my now wife, and we found that the work was resonating with people, and we kind of quickly found an audience out there that was resonating with the stories we were telling. And it just sort of grew and grew and grew. And at some point, we realized that it had a really fun opportunity to become a brand. And part of our motivation for that was having some kind of business model so that we could survive and pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that was like an aha moment for us was realizing how media, and I'm sure you experienced this with podcasts, that you can make a piece of media, whether it's a video or a podcast episode or something. Most people are going to see that, experience it once, and then move on with their life, and they're never going to watch it again or hear it again. And we felt like while that was really impactful, we love making documentaries, we still do. We knew from our education days that, and as we were teaching students too, as TAs and stuff, that you really have to reinforce things over and over and over again before people really get it. And so we were trying to think of how can we incorporate repetition into our teaching. And then we realized, wow, clothing's a really cool canvas for that, because when you wear something over and over and over again, and if we could somehow incorporate education into that experience, so that when you like pull this thing out of your drawer, you're remembering and recalling things that you have learned, that creates a sort of repetition. And then that increases sort of the likelihood that that's going to stick with the person. And that was around like 2014. And we had this idea, okay, we could start taking our science storytelling and incorporate it into clothing. And we called the concept Advocate of Apparel. That was sort of the name we gave it. And we made our first collection of garments that were inspired by marine species and ecosystems that we felt needed advocacy. And it just very quickly, our audience was like, yes, this is awesome. We want this. And from then on, the company just blossomed into an apparel company, though we really kind of look at ourselves and feel like we're a science communication company that just sort of happens to sell clothing. And now we sell other things like calendars and water bottles, all sorts of little things. But
Right.
Yeah, that's sort of our origin story in a nutshell, and how we came to be.
Well, I appreciate the storytelling aspect of it. I read in your blog that you do like to speak in metaphors and story, and that especially I noticed in your newsletter, what struck me was how entertaining your articles were. However, you do then go into the science-y part of it, but coming up with a story, like I mentioned in my email to you, the sharks on cocaine headline, I thought, okay, I need to hear about this. And I actually read a part of that on the podcast one time, because I was telling my listeners, I said, you really need to subscribe to this newsletter because you will learn a lot, but it is a fun way of learning. I want to go back to in your origin story when, first of all, I'm thinking engineering and then all this creative side are using like two different sides of your brain. Were you always kind of like a creative person as well as that engineering type of person, or do you not even see a difference in that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I don't necessarily see too much of a difference. I think for me, my creative process is very inspired by engineering, right? So I like to break things down and really I like to understand how things work and why. And so, if when I started making videos and editing videos and producing videos, I really like to deconstruct how, the X's and the O's of these things and how do they work, and how do they make people feel. So I guess I wouldn't consider myself growing up, my sisters and stuff were way more conventionally artistically gifted than I was. But my canvas was more with mathematics and equations and robots and electronics and building things. It all kind of came together, I think, for me when I love to write. And I got exposed to creative writing pretty early on in high school, and had some great teachers that really instilled that passion. And it sort of all came together, I think, with the intersection of social media, low cost cameras that are really easy to use, access to, music you can put in videos. It's like all these tools that came together to make it very accessible for someone with no formal background to just mess around with producing media.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can do all this stuff just like on your phone. That all came together in such a way that I think it hit a lot of my interests in a way that I didn't really expect. And then I found that I love telling a good story and making a video that's compelling and educational, makes you kind of laugh a little bit. And the same goes for writing, like with our newsletter. I love to have something that like will make you laugh and brighten your day, but you also walk away maybe having learned it, one or two things like technically interesting that you would not have run across otherwise. That kind of stuff really makes me feel inspired and makes what I love the best about my job. So yeah, I think it was a lot of fortunate timing. If this had been 20 years ago, I think it would have been a lot harder for me to get into that and probably wouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really, I thank myself or thank the universe for, allowing me to exist during this part of human history.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I went to college in Western Massachusetts, small women's college, Mount Holyoke, and I majored in English because it was really the one thing I got the best grades in. So, and I had no desire to teach or even write. So anytime I come across some really good writing, I stop and I think, wow, that was really good. And that was not AI. That was somebody really coming up with that, because you can just tell. And
yeah.
I'm as you're talking, I just had to pull up the email. I think it came to me yesterday, and it was about the betta fish. Is that how you pronounce it? Betta?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a study that came out like a week ago.
Yeah. But how you had written it just cracked me up at one point. I wish I could find, you can probably remember what you'd said, but, being a freshman in college and it being so out of place.
Yeah, I had a few cracks in that article. There's one about, and there's no hit towards podcast, but there was a little joke about starting a crypto podcast. Which is sort of...
that was the part. That was the part. Yeah, the researchers took 13 fish and observed them living in different enclosures that varied in size and furnishing. They looked for normal behaviors like foraging and exploring as signs of wellness, and abnormal behaviors like starting a crypto podcast and running into the glass walls repetitively is a sign of less wellness. And just that, I mean, as I read it, I just thought that is just so funny. And it's those little things you put in there. I think that's a really good way of being entertaining enough that you're not really dumbing down the information, but you're capturing people's interest. And then you do a really good job of, if you want to learn more, you can go and look at the studies and read more about the science behind it. So you're not just spouting platitudes and things like that. We can really kind of dive into it. So I really do appreciate that. What has been, this is probably not fair to say, is there an aspect of ocean conservation or a particular ocean dweller that you have the most passion for, or that you really think, man, I wish people knew more about this?
For me personally, I come to ocean science more from, my journey was through engineering and through more like physical oceanography. So I'm less of an expert in marine biology. I really actually was a pretty lousy biology student. So I think a little less connected to any individual critters per se. I feel more drawn to the entire ecosystem and the entire space, which is funny for me because I spend a lot of my time writing about biology now, it's just sort of interesting. And we have a number of our employees are marine biologists by training. So I'm like the least marine biology person on the team, but I wouldn't say there's an individual animal or, ecosystem. It's more, for me, it's like what we were talking about at the top of the episode. Is like just kind of walking out and being on the ocean as a whole, for me, just is incredibly restorative and has always just been this like deeply personally important place for me. And so I feel like I relate to all of the animals. I think in terms of what I would love for people to resonate with is just the importance of this ecosystem. We're terrestrial animals. Most of the planet, we don't really spend our time out there. We just kind of look at it. We don't really live on it. We visit it, but we come back to our land. But I think a lot of people don't realize how significantly important the ocean and its health is for the health of our planet overall, and the health for our ecosystem here on land, and appreciating, that there may be something happening far, far away, thousands of meters under the water, that is going to influence like the oxygen you breathe. You're not going to see that in your everyday, but being able to understand and appreciate that, especially through all of the climatic changes we are currently experiencing and will continue to experience for the next 100 years. To me, this, as a graduate and undergrad, I kind of look, when you're in that state where you're like, what do you want to do with your life? I looked at that and felt like that the climate crisis and how we adjust to climate change and how we learn to live in better balance with our planet's ecosystems, to me, is going to be the defining issue of my lifetime, and probably my daughter's lifetime too. And so it felt strategically smart to work on that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then combined with just loving the ocean, that just sort of nudged me in that career path.
Yeah. I know it's truly wonderful when you can blend your passion and your purpose with a job that you really love. And does it really seem like a job then? It's just what you do.
I thank my lucky stars every day that I have that privilege.
I think, well, that happened to me in a way. I was living in landlocked Orlando, Florida for 14 years. And I was thinking, I do not want to be here anymore. And I declared out loud, I want to meet my soulmate, quit my 9-to-5, and move to the beach. And I pretty much did all three. Boom,
That's
boom,
awesome.
boom. Yeah. And I got here. I'm in Jacksonville Beach. I don't know. Are you in Florida still?
So we actually just moved. We were in Miami. We started the company and we lived in Miami for 20 years. And then we just moved like 8 months ago. My wife and I, we moved to Rhode Island. And so now we live up in a little town called Narragansett, Rhode Island, but we still have offices and a number of team members still in Miami. But so it's a big change, but it's also, Rhode Island's the ocean state. We're surrounded by water in a lot of ways. It's a little colder, but it's just as much ocean inspired as down there. So
yeah. Oh, I love that because I'm interested in all types of beaches, and I'm here at Jacksonville Beach, which I love. I mean, we're just a few blocks away, and I can be there in a moment.
Beaches.
Yeah, and when I was going to school in Massachusetts, all my friends were going to the Cape in the summer and all that, and I never got to go. And I thought, oh, I really, really missed out on that.
Oh, it's never too late.
I know.
It's still there. It's still there.
It is still there, and in Rhode Island, and all of that is really very special. And I was just thinking about you as a 7-year-old in your own little sailboat going around it. I took a couple of quasi-sailing lessons when I was younger, and I kept getting hit over the head with the boom, and it really scared me because you have to account for the wind, and I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. Were you aware of any of that, or were you just like, hey, I'm out here? I mean, because it's the ocean.
Yeah, that's a great question, I think. And so I've done a lot of sailing coaching, so especially with children. So I've done that for 20 something years, but the younger the children get exposed to it, there's a delicate balance. It's very easy to feel like it's a really scary environment. So it's really important, especially when the kids are super young, to navigate that in a way that, like anything, makes them feel comfortable and safe and stuff. And then once they get sort of over the hump, it becomes like second nature to them. I think I was fortunate just being exposed to boats. My dad tells me stories of their first sailing experiences as a family. He would sail the boat down to a harbor in Buzzards Bay by himself. And then my mom would drive my sisters and I, at 2, 4, and 6 or whatever age we were at the time. And then we would all get on the boat in the protected harbor and not have to deal with like kind of the scary sail down. And then their rule of thumb was as soon as team morale started going south, my mom would swoop us up, put us in the car and leave. And my dad would deal with getting the boat back home. And they did that for a couple of years to just sort of ease us into it. And that I think was a smart strategy. You just keep doing that. And then all of a sudden being on boats and water just feels like being in your backyard. And by the time I started sailing a boat by myself, which would have been around like 7, 8, I already was very comfortable with it. And then I think it was more just about, wow, I have like complete independence. If I want to go over there, I can go there. I can do what I want. It's like having your license at 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah.
You can go just whatever. It doesn't click with everyone, but for me, you know, I tried to play baseball and basketball, and those I was a disaster and I hated it, but they stuck me on a little boat and sailed around the harbor, and my brain just exploded and I never turned back. So for whatever reason, for me, it clicked, and I'm so thankful for it because it's, you know, it's a wonderful lifetime sport that I can do. I still do it now. And
Yeah.
I'd love for my daughter to do it too, but so I'm navigating as a parent now how to introduce that in a thoughtful way, just like my parents did for me.
Well, you had a good example of that for sure, for sure. You surf as well?
I do. We do a lot of surfing, especially here in Rhode Island. It's one reason why we moved here. There's really excellent surf here, and my wife and I both love surfing. Pound for pound, that is probably my favorite.
Uh-huh.
It's just I love it, and so we do that as a family. Not my daughter's too young, but we're hoping to get her into it. And yeah, there's something about that. You know, I studied waves and how waves form and shoal, and so there's a bit of like an academic fascination with waves, but just it's being able to go out and be fully immersed in the ocean. You know, we have seals pop up and smell the salt and hear the foghorns. It's just there's no better way to spend a couple hours of your life than that to me.
Yeah, I don't surf, but I can paddleboard, and I'm a good swimmer, so I'm not really afraid of the water or the waves. I just haven't had much luck balancing.
You have no
so.
excuse now. You're in Jack's Beach they have great waves there.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, they do. However, I'm actually looking for very few waves because we do like to go out in the morning at sunrise and paddle out and just wait for the sun to come up, and that you can see the dolphins, and we'll bring a thermos of coffee, and
Nice.
a friend of ours that goes with us, he makes breakfast burritos, and we're just kind of sitting there watching. It's just magical.
That's a great way to start the day.
It is. It really is. I love that. You had mentioned on your website how you had gone on this trip to Australia quite by you just kind of took a leap of faith or a leap of crazy and went. And tell me about that, because that was a totally different environment, I would imagine, than what you were studying in the States. And what was that like?
Yeah, so I mean, subject-wise, it actually was quite similar to what I was studying. So it was my academic advisor. He's a pretty famous modeler, meaning like computer modeler. Anytime you talk about modeling and oceanography, there's like different scales. So there's people that look at, you know, the whole planet, and there's people that look at maybe things that happen on the order of 100 to 1,000 kilometers. He specialized in what's called the near shore. So you're looking at like rip currents and really focused on the beaches and the shores. And you're looking at processes that happen on the scale of like 1 meter to maybe 100 kilometers at most. So really like zooming in on those finer details. And so he was really good and continues to work. He's from the Netherlands and works on using computer models to try to basically replicate what we're seeing in these complex environments. And I think a lot of people take that for granted. They think that, you know, science fully understands how water moves, but it's actually incredibly complicated. And the farther you zoom in, it just continues to get more and more complicated. One way to look at that is like you pour your cream in your coffee and just like look carefully at what happens. And it's just mayhem. And so he specialized in that and got invited to this experiment in Australia where he was going to be doing modeling work with some team from, I think they were from the University of New South Wales. And they were looking at rip currents and they're trying to better understand, what are the physics of rip currents, what caused them. And this study was specifically looking at testing swimming strategies for saving yourself. So most people are familiar with swim parallel, not against. And they wanted to test different swimming strategies with real life swimmers wearing heart rate monitors and test these things.
Wow.
And I heard about it and I'm like, that sounds very cool. And it would really lend itself, I think, to an interesting video. And that was going to be sort of my first science storytelling video. I'd started Waterlust officially like a month earlier. I gave it a name and committed myself to doing this project. And so I asked them if I could come. I'm like, if I fly myself there, can I come? They asked the principal scientist and they're like, yeah, sure. Nope, you can come, but you got to pay your own way. I had to get permission from my professors because I had to skip a bunch of projects and hand homework in late. And they were all, very supportive and which really meant a lot to me. They were all supportive of my weird ideas. So I flew down there. I found it like the cheapest flight I could find. I was a grad student, so I was broke and put on a credit card. And I borrowed some GoPros and flew down and got on a train. And I remember I took a train up from Sydney and I was super tired because I've been on the overnight flight. And then I got popped off the train right up from the beach. And I walk in and the experiment was just starting. I just walked to the beach, no rest. And I had a little orange box with all my equipment, put my wetsuit on and just started filming stuff. And it was a really cool experience. It was a very cool experiment. One of their big findings was that you're almost statistically better not trying to swim, that if you just try to tread water and stay calm, one of the deadliest parts of rip currents is the onset of panic. Like if you feel, and anyone that's ever been stuck in a rip current or stuck in surf or in having big waves breaking on your head, once that panic sets in, you can feel that fight or flight, kick in, and that can be deadly. And so one of their big messages was if you can try to stay calm, don't worry so much about getting yourself out of the rip current. Most of the time, the rip current is actually going to recirculate. You might get pulled offshore, but a lot of times it's going to recirculate you back to the beach if you just hang out and that if you just ride it. So I incorporate that into the video. And that was sort of our first Waterlust video we put on the internet. I think it's still on our YouTube channel if you dig far enough back. And after that experience, all of the scientists were really happy to have something that they felt was fun and beautiful and representative of their work. And I found that working with them and creating it super rewarding. And after that, I was like, okay, Waterlust is off to the races where there's no turning back. I want to keep doing this. This is really fun. And yeah, so in a lot of ways, I can remember sitting at my parents, I think it was Thanksgiving. It was my parents' house deciding whether or not to click the button for the $700 plane ticket, which I think what it cost back then now is probably like quadruple that, and just feeling very uneasy about spending that kind of money. But it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. So I'm happy I did it.
Well, I think a lot of us have those ideas and we hold back on it because we think that's a crazy one. And I am fully on board with those of you who just take that leap and go. I've been a huge proponent of that. I really don't want to be the person that thinks, oh, if I could have done that or be
the regret and life is too short for that stuff. And
I just I was like moving to the beach. I just didn't want to be one of those people that said one day I'm going to move to the beach someday, and I thought no, today let's make this happen. I want to go back to the apparel for a moment because it's sustainable. It's all of those wonderful things that you'd want in an apparel company to be. And like you said, it's kind of a dual purpose in that it's really, you're kind of like a walking billboard for whatever cause it is that you're supporting because you're wearing it and you're telling people about it. Tell me how the apparel thing came about. Was that something you in your mind came up with, or somebody say, hey, this might be a good thing? And
Yeah, so our first dabbles in apparel were we were screen printing like t-shirts and in our kitchen. And I can still like smell the ink. Like it the whole house like stank of the ink when it would cure. And we were just selling it to our, we had a few, we had a modest following from the video work, and people were buying the shirts and they were excited about it. And it was right around then when we had the idea, we were like, oh, this could be a science communication tool. And that was like the aha moment. It was like anything that we do, it's always a group effort. So it was myself and my wife, and then my wife's sister was a key of all of this. And she was a fashion designer. She's a really talented designer and works not just designing, but managing the whole supply chain back end of in apparel. And she was in New York City, and we were in Miami, making these t-shirts, and my wife was texting her, hey, we're doing this, like, help us out. She was sort of consulting on the side and helping us figure this out. And she was super helpful and knowledgeable. And at some point we were like, we knew that she was sort of not loving her job and lifestyle in busy New York City. And we were like, hey, at one point we thought we could swing, hiring her and having her come and really spearhead and take us from, making t-shirts in the kitchen to like doing some really legitimate products. And timing lined up, and I think resonated with what the brand stood for at the time, and took the leap of faith and, quit her job and moved to Miami. And then she really was the quarterback to come up with our first real signature products. I think living in Miami, we have to have sun protection because, we're out in the water all the time, but it's really hot and really sunny. And the way our first like major product hit was our leggings, which continued to this day to be one of our most popular products. And that came from her and my wife needing those. They needed a legging that they could wear. My wife was a shark biologist, and they go out on boats, and part of working up sharks is, especially big tiger sharks and bull sharks and hammerheads, you have to sit on them. And if you're doing like blood draws or putting trackers on them, and shark skin gives you this thing called shark burn, and any shark scientist listening will know this. It's shark skin super smooth in one direction, and it's incredibly abrasive. It can like cut your skin and draw blood if you rub it in the other direction. So it's really important to have protective clothing on.
Yeah.
And so that was like kind of part of the design criteria was, we need this to be durable, and it has to be able to withstand the abuse of a day shark tagging, which is, you're up at 4:30 in the morning, you don't get back till dinner. And so Laura, my wife's sister, was helped prototype and figuring out developing fabrics. And that was really the first product that emerged, and it kind of came out of that need that she had and a lot of other shark scientists we know needed. And then we had that idea of incorporating species and stuff into it. So we did a couple prototypes and just put them out on social media and said, hey, we're going to make these and see what people said. And the response was immediate. Like, we want this. The industry's changed a lot since then. We were sort of the first company to be making these like bright, bold, fun, garments that are really designed to get wet, that are designed to be sun protective. Now there's, a lot of other kind of copycats, and there's a lot of other brands doing it, which, we're okay with. We're glad to inspire the industry to be a little bit more fun and fashionable, bright. But at the time, there wasn't really anything. And so I think when everyone saw that for the first time and was like, whoa, whale shark leggings, it didn't exist. And now like, I want that. So that gave us a lot of hope that was something the market wanted. And then it was just sort of off to the races. I think it would have been a lot harder if we said, hey, here's this thing. And like, it was crickets and no one wanted it. That would have been trickier. But
Yeah.
And you had asked about sustainability. Our goal is to be, science communication and advocating for the environment would be massively hypocritical if we were creating stuff that's just damaging the environment. There is some degree of harm that is unavoidable. You can't create anything without doing some harm. And we try to be very honest about that and not try to greenwash the cost of making widgets away. But we knew if we're going to do a business, it has to be the most environmentally responsible possible. And we have to be constantly pushing how far we can go with that. And so that looks like things like we only use recycled materials that are locally sourced, or we use algae inks in our t-shirts, or, printing processes that don't use any water. We're always trying to find whatever manufacturing technique exists or could exist that does less and less harm to the environment. And that in itself is a huge wing of our business that takes an enormous amount of time and money and resources, but it's something we're passionate about. And I think it's a responsibility that we have. If we're going to be a business that decides to make things, we have to take on that work and do as least harm as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And you have a buyback program or something like that. I was really interested to see that.
Yeah, we'll take back we have a buyback program, and part of that is we have really great fiber partner. These are the people that collect the post-consumer bottles and chip them up and melt them down into fibers. They will take back any of our old garments and basically put them in a wood chipper and melt them down and turn them into new fibers. And there's a lot of details, like it has to have a specific composition of polyester, recycled polyester in there. But if people send us stuff from other companies, we can't downcycle that because a lot of them aren't made from the right stuff. But all of our customers at the end of life of your garment, if you don't want it anymore, you have sort of two options. We have a resale platform. You can, if it's still in good condition, you can sell it to someone else, which a lot of people do. And then if it's really on its last legs, if you're like a shark researcher and you've just torn these things up, year after year, and they're finally dead, we'll collect them. And once we have a big enough batch, we send it back to the factory in North Carolina, and they chop them up and turn them into new fibers, and we turn them into new clothes. And the other part of this is that we buy these back. So we'll actually pay you to send them back. And we do that to try to just increase the incentive, because it's really hard to get people to actually recycle things and to take the action. It's so much easier to just throw it in the trash. So we try to give our customers some incentive to send them back to us so we can close the loop on that product.
Yeah, that's great, because we could go on about fast fashion and throw away all that we have, and you just wonder where all that goes. I was just thinking, to kind of wrap things up, you do have a number of causes and people that are affiliated with you, right? You're not operating in a vacuum. You do have other organizations helping you out. Tell me about those and the network that you have.
Sure. So it's part of our sort of approach is, okay, we want to tell science stories and educate customers about the species or ecosystem that a garment represents. Where do we get that information? We can do literature reviews and find out information just ourselves, but we felt like it was much more powerful to actually partner with researchers and educators that are actively leading the charge on that subject in real time. And so for each of our products, we find a group, usually a research lab, sometimes a nonprofit organization, who is on the front lines on that issue. And part of our partnership is donating 5% of sales from that line to them annually to help fund their work. And it's not, in the realm of scientific research, our donations are sort of a drop in the bucket. If you're a big lab that gets millions of dollars a year, we're a tiny company. We're not going to be able to generate that much money. But one thing our partners tell us is they really appreciate the flexibility of our funding. So we really give our partners the flexibility to use that funding wherever they need to kind of fill gaps. And those that are familiar with writing grants, especially this day and age where the grant process in science is very much under attack, having flexible funding every year to buy a new outboard engine for your boat or to buy new life jackets for the grad students, stuff like that, they really appreciate that. We donate to, I think we have about 20 partners right now. It's always kind of changing as things get retired and new partners come in. But so there's that financing element. And then the other part, even more impactful for them, is we work with them to get the messaging right to the community. And so that exists in a lot of different ways. When you receive our products, we have these call to action cards that sit right on top. And we basically tell the researchers, hey, what are 5 things that if you could tell tens of thousands of people how they could help, what would you tell them? And we work with them to kind of distill that down into, actionable actions that our customers can take. And then we also provide a educational email series to each of our customers, which is sort of like 5 to 7 part email that goes deep into the history, current status, and future considerations of these topics. And all of this is meant to be sort of an educational ecosystem that gets all of our customers to the same base level, so that when they put their garment on and someone asks them, hey, what is that? What is that color? Oh, it's a parrotfish. Oh, why is that important? That they understand how parrotfish contribute to reef ecosystems and how critically important they are, and they shouldn't be overfished and all this kind of stuff. So it's that we take a lot of pride knowing that our customers have really high open rates on those emails, and our customers are really passionate about like learning all this stuff. And then, as you spoke to earlier, we have our newsletter that goes out every Sunday. So we've sort of built and amassed this community of tens of thousands. I think it's up to like 60 or 70,000 people that are really engaged on this stuff. And they go out and talk to their communities and find ways to help, and they spread that information. And especially today, the advocacy for science and the importance of science and evidence-based decision-making and that whole process is incredibly important for society. And we feel really lucky to play a small part in helping our researcher partners and education partners bring their work to the world.
Great. I'm thinking if one of those listeners out there is inspired to help Waterlust or any of these causes, what's the one thing that person who's listening right now can do to help you or help the cause?
Yeah. And so I would say there isn't really a universal answer to that question, because one thing we try to focus a lot on is that accessibility to help is a big thing. So how one person can help may look very different than how another person can help. So we try not to emphasize specifics of help too much. So like if you live in Southern California and you can do a beach cleanup, it might look a lot different than if you live in Wisconsin, or if you live in Ohio, or maybe you're someone who has a really high paying job and you have a lot of resources and you can organize a fundraiser. Everyone has different tools at their disposal. So I would say the best answer is to, figure out what is accessible to you, and to identify something that you're passionate about, something that you have an interest and an excitement to really follow through on. If you're kind of about it, you're probably not going to take it that far. So following your passion is definitely a great starting point. And then finding whatever's accessible to you. And we have a lot of resources through our newsletters, websites, and you can always reach out to us at hello@waterlust.com. We get students that ask all the time, how can I help? Here's where I am. What can I do? We can tailor the answer knowing who you are and what you're doing, what you have accessible to you. But I think the key thing is just get going. Don't worry so much. I think a lot of people get in their own way thinking that they have to do something big and bold and like attention grabbing. Otherwise, it's not worth it. I think that's sort of a trap. And we see this in business too. We get a lot of entrepreneurs that are like, hey, I want to start this thing. And they just never start it because they want it to be big off the bat, but they don't realize everything starts from very modest beginnings. The most important thing is to just start. And then that's like part one. And then part two is trying to kind of hold yourself to a process of incremental improvement. So maybe you start by like, hey, I'm going to ride my bike instead of drive my car to the supermarket today. Just that one little thing. And then you're like, okay, that's one. My next thing, I'm going to try to do something a little bit better than that. I'm going to try to go pick up like 10 pieces of trash in my local park. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to try to do something more than that. I think the combination of just get going, commit yourself to incremental improvement. If people could just do that, we could make an enormous difference.
I love that. Yeah. Just a little bit goes a long way. And if we're all just doing a little bit, it ends up being a lot. And we can feel good about that.
Yeah, it's an addictive feeling, helping out, doing a little bit more and feeling like you're figuring it out. And we get a lot of really awesome stories from our community about grassroots organizations that start small and then they keep at it. And then next thing you know, they're doing really amazing stuff. And I think people just have to realize that every story of something really awesome, if you follow it all the way back to the beginning, it starts as something that is like real small, which is the story of Waterlust. That moment of going to Australia, that was like, we have waterlust.com with the basic HTML like website, nothing to show for it, and just buying a plane ticket and going. That's how it started. And now we've been doing it for, man, that's like 15 years now. You keep committed to that incremental improvement mentality and you just keep plugging away. And then the next thing you know, it's been decades and we're able to write pretty sizable checks to researchers and they're super thankful that we're funding their work. And it's like, whoa, that's pretty cool to go from where we started to where we are. And so that I like to remind, especially students, that because you don't need to start big. You just start small and start chipping away and just keep at it.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful place to end things. I am super inspired to do my part and keep working on that. Thank you, Patrick, so much for agreeing to be on the podcast today. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to share all your contacts in the show notes, and hopefully we can all jump on the Waterlust. I don't know. I don't want to say bandwagon on the ship Waterlust.
Well, we love building our community. We love our customers and we love hearing from people. So, any of the listeners, if you ever have any questions, if you email us, there's a good chance you're going to get a response probably from me or my wife. So we love hearing from folks and we appreciate all the work that you're doing and the community is doing on behalf of the ocean. And we're just honored to be a part of it.
Thank you. And the beach is speaking. Are you listening? Wow, what a fabulous way to learn about conservation and be able to share it with others in such a fun way. Spring has arrived here at the beach and summer will be here before you know it. So if you're shopping for something super cool and sustainable to wear at the pool, the lake, or the ocean, check out Waterlust. The link is in the show notes. And by the way, what did you think of Patrick's advice about what to do if you're caught in a riptide? It's a really big thing here at our beach. We get a lot of riptide cautions. And I was always taught to swim parallel to the shore, which is one way, but I always felt it might be easier just to float and conserve energy before trying to swim it out. And while I'm not eager to get into one, I do find it comforting to know that I could relax and trust that the current will bring me back in eventually. Do you have a story about getting caught in a riptide or some other kind of ocean-related encounter? I want to know. Go to my website, thebeachspeaks.com, and leave a voicemail or send an email to page@thebeachspeaks.com. In the meantime, the beach is speaking. I know you're listening. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Beach Speaks. If you enjoyed what you heard, please spread the beachy vibes and share it with a friend. Because, let's be honest, who doesn't want more beach in their lives? And if more beach is what you crave, go to thebeachspeaks.com and sign up for my newsletter. It's an easy way to stay in the know, collect some tips and travel hacks for your next beach adventure, and find out what I'm doing at the beach. And if you want to dive deeper into the ocean of support, consider becoming a Beach Speaks Patreon member. Your contribution helps keep the podcast afloat, and you'll enjoy some cool perks that only our Patreon family gets to enjoy. The beach is speaking. Are you listening?